Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for coming to the THETA round this week. Today we have one of our own, Robert Wu, who's going to talk to us about smartwatch monitoring of patients with COPD. He's an associate professor of our medicine at U of T and general internist here at UHN. I didn't know this about Robert until I read this, that he has an undergraduate in computer engineering and an MSc in Clinical Epidemiology. I think I knew that. He's going to talk about three particular aspects of COPD patients wearing smartwatches, which are on the learning objectives, which you saw when you came to talk. So I want to read those to you. And the other thing I need to tell you is if you have questions, Robert has asked you to ask as we go along, not to save them for the end. Thanks.
There will be time at the end, but please interrupt as we go along. So thanks for the introduction, George. So happy to be here, and thanks for allowing me the time to talk about my project, or our team's project, using smartwatches to monitor patients with COPD. So our learning objectives describe the feasibility of using wearable technology in patients with COPD, to describe what patients with COPD want in a wearable and a self-management app, and then those that are interested in doing something similar, describe the journey of developing wearable technology in patients, and in this case, it was patients with COPD. So just to declare our conflict of interest, we are partnering currently with Samsung. Don't think it really biases too much in terms of the presentation, but just something to keep in mind. So just a little bit about COPD for those who aren't familiar. Some people are very familiar with COPD, but COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I think you had Andrea Gershon talk a couple years ago about COPD and her research. So she's my partner and a COPD researcher. I forwarded some slides for those people who are aware, but it's chronic obstructive airflow limitation, usually related to smoking, previously called bronchitis emphysema. So some data in terms of the severity of, or the burden of disease. This is a study looking at the global COPD prevalence, and the rates of COPD range somewhere between 4 to greater than 16% in terms of different countries. Here they have North America around 12 to 16% of patients have COPD. This is Andrea's slide. She and her paper from 2010 looking at the prevalence of COPD, and overall around 9.5% in 2007. More recently, estimates around 11.8% of patients have COPD. And she's also looked at lifetime risk. This is her last, I think this is the last slide I used from her. And you can see the different lifetime risks. So asthma, people get it earlier, but still some slow increase, whereas COPD, much more prevalent as people age. Not as common as, or not as prevalent as diabetes, but more prevalent than heart failure. And probably more of an impact to patients' lives than things like diabetes and asthma as well. So it's not just prevalent, it's also a common cause of death. And as of 2012, it was number 5 in Canada after cancer, heart disease, and stroke and accident. Worldwide, it's number 3. This, I think it's just based on how people group different diseases here. The cancer is split up into different kinds of cancer. And so COPD moved up to number 3. So it's common, it is increased mortality, but there's also human and economic impacts to COPD. It's one of the most common causes of hospitalizations. And here you can see that it's higher than coronary disease, asthma, heart failure. And not just the common to be hospitalized, but there's a repeat hospitalization also very common. I've been doing some work with the team trying to reduce our readmission rate within UHN for COPD, and because our readmission rates are some of the highest in the province, 20 to 25%, 30-day readmission rates. And we've been working for about a year trying to improve our in-hospital processes without much success. So you can see that our COPD readmission rates bounce around a lot. And this is a part of our UHN quality improvement plan. So it's a priority to our hospital, but also our local health integration network. It's a priority because they also have overall some of the highest readmission rates, some of which is probably driven by UHN. So we focus on acute exacerbations. So we know that it accelerates lung function, it diminishes quality of life, leads to hospitalization and death. And early treatment can reduce the severity of acute exacerbations, prevent hospitalization, and reduce morbidity and mortality. Oh, I'd like to reduce mortality. So one solution that's been proposed is more monitoring. So maybe we can detect exacerbations by monitoring people at home, things like their symptoms, their heart rate, respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, physical activity. And so this falls into the big term of home telemonitoring and COPD. And it can be broadly defined as a distant monitoring of components of patient's health as part of a chronic care model. And ideally, getting that data, caregiver reviewing, can maybe predict exacerbation and initiate treatment. And unfortunately, there have been many systematic reviews of telemonitoring, including 28 randomized controlled trials, and really no difference in exacerbation rates, patient-reported outcomes, or health service utilization. So our thinking is that we just need more monitoring, as opposed to telemonitoring, which typically once a day you'll get some data points. Maybe we need near continuous monitoring. That's a hypothesis. But also the issue is that instead of asking patients to fill out symptom cards or something on an iPad, to actually use sensors and more passive data collection. So instead of asking, it's more on the side of deriving, and so more heavy on the data processing side, collecting audio and trying to detect coughs and wheezing, shortness of breath, collecting data on their activity. And it's using that data in terms of, and this is a computer science term, the fusion of that data of all these signals to hopefully predict acute exacerbation. And so our overall goal, reduce COPD hospitalizations by providing patients with a practical way to monitor their condition and detect early exacerbation. Shabir.
So Rob, just to go back to the compelling rationale here, I'm a little worried when you said 28 randomized trials, negative, but we need more monitoring to prove it. Like, is there any signal in those trials or any other reason that would compel you to say that more monitoring may be the solution, or is this just a technological solution looking for a problem without good background data?
It is often, it is technology looking for a solution. And in this case, that's what we're doing. So I admit that. But there are, when you look at some of the barriers to the telemonitoring, why it didn't work, it's because patient adherence was low, right? They didn't want to follow these procedures or technically challenging for them. And there's issues with asking somebody to do certain things on a daily basis. And then the other issue is it enough data? Is it one data point per day? When exacerbations, when there's different types of exacerbations, it seems like there's fast exacerbations and slow. And do you actually get enough data? So it's purely hypothesis. Dr. Graham.
So since Shabir opened the questions,
yeah.
I answer this one. So can you talk more about, there's my sense is that I'll sort of blow it up from telemonitoring to sort of disease management programs that, in at least some conditions, I don't know about COPD, there's been some data that like the nurse calls and says, are you having chest pain? The patient says, actually I am. And then it actually drives people into the emergency departments. Is that happening in the telemonitoring literature? So how's your breathing? Oh, actually not so good. Go to emerge. Go to emerge.
So great question. And I don't think I'm that qualified to answer that. And there's probably other people in the room that are probably better that know the telemonitoring in heart failure, COPD. I think there probably is that increase in signal. Is that good or bad? Not sure.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so leads to our first study, which is, go ahead.
I was going to say, in the telemonitoring program that we've implemented at eHealth Innovation, we found that by having frequent communications with the patients so that they can submit their data, we are preventing emergency room visits because we have data up front before they get to the point where they need to go to the emergency room. So we're actually reducing emergency room admission.
Yeah, some of the ICC work at St. Joe's, which I was involved with, what it actually did is actually get integrated comprehensive care. It's like that home care piece. What it actually did is instead of going to the emerge, there was actually a target for somebody to come into a clinic. So you're actually not going to a location that is not knowing what your history is. You're going to a targeted clinician that's got a clinic office and clinic hours that can actually provide care at the time versus trying to go into the system. So system issues, right?
Different models of care. Unfortunately, nothing that really, in terms of I think there's a few positives, a lot of negative trials. So
Right.
All right. So we're not even there yet. But anyway, so we're just talking about feasibility of using smartwatches to monitor patients. And so that was our first study. And we published it in the Journal of Medical Internet Research, Mobile Health, last year. And so our study purpose was to see whether patients with COPD would actually use, wear, and maintain a smartwatch for extended periods of time, and determine whether we could reliably capture near continuous sensation. And so this is one of our patients using our smartphone app, but also wearing our big clunky Android smartwatch. So this was a feasibility study. We enrolled patients or participants with COPD, aged 40 years and older, recruited from Sunnybrook, Toronto General, Toronto Western, and our primary outcome was to determine whether patients would wear and maintain the smartwatch, because it's something they'd have to charge on a daily basis. And then what was the availability of some of our data: heart rate, audio, activity data, daily symptom surveys, and we asked some questions at the end in terms of their experience. So just sort of the flow of the data from going from bottom to top. The smartwatch was collecting steps, heart rate, audio, accelerometer, gyroscope from the sensors. This went into the smartwatch or smartphone by Bluetooth, and then they were also asked to fill out a survey as part of trying to determine what their symptom levels was, and this is a validated symptom survey, and we're trying to figure out if they're actually having exacerbations. And then all flowed into our server. And so this is all purely behind the scenes data monitor or data gathering. There is no intervention for this study. It's pure feasibility. Audio was raw audio, so it was just purely from the microphone off the smartwatch. So whatever they were doing, whatever other people were doing, whatever TV they're watching, it was turning on and off because our battery couldn't last the full 14, 18 hours, so it's typically on for 2 minutes, off for 8 minutes. But patients did consent to that. All right, so in terms of our results, we assessed 179 patients. We enrolled 28, so there were a lot of people who were excluded, about 80 because they were medically ill, 20 because they didn't speak English. Some people just were not interested in participating in a research study, and then some people didn't want, were worried about the privacy issues. So we enrolled 28 patients, 16 actually completed the 90 days, dropout because they were too sick, they're concerned about the privacy, technical issues. Average age was 68, 36% were women, and then we were able to get data from the surveys and the sensors, the heart rate, activity, audio, about 2/3 of the time.
Was there a reason why you guys decided to implement the audio portion? Like, I'm just wondering, because that's the privacy concern for a lot of people.
Yeah, huge. So it was to capture, our hope was, so we didn't think that just heart rate and activity was enough to detect acute exacerbation. And so using the audio, maybe there's extra signal there. Coughs, maybe breathlessness, syllables per breath that we could derive from there. That was the hope.
And it's a triaxial accelerometer?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where was the data that was collected stored?
So UHN server.
And people who were aware of that, they were hesitant to share the information.
That they were hesitant?
Like, they knew that it was all going to be stored on UHN servers. Like, it wasn't going to Samsung.
Correct. No, this is not even part of Samsung. This is pre-Samsung. So yeah, but still, how much would you want all your audio recorded?
Right.
They could delete. They could. I don't think anyone ever did, but they could, right? But I don't think most of us probably not that interested in having our audio, especially after all this Facebook, Cambridge Analytica.
But what did you tell them about what's going to happen to audio? Did you say said it's going to be like computer processed, or did you say we'll be listening to it? And
We will be listening to it. We'll be analyzing it. Yeah. And a lot of people didn't care. Some people did.
Was the audio helpful in the end? Or?
We'll get to that. I'll get to that. But that's going to be wild.
And you said a lot of people were too ill to
Yeah.
watch, and why? How?
So we recruited from the ward. I'm not sure if you've been on our ward, but if they, are you interested in somebody who's coming into the hospital admitted with a COPD exacerbation? Are you interested in participating in this research study? You have to wear this watch, and a lot of people are just too sick, leave me alone. And these are elderly patients. They're not, say, a typical patient with an asthma exacerbation, 34 years old. We really don't see in the hospital anymore anyway. So a lot of people not so interested.
I'm curious, how long did the REB take to approve that?
Probably the typical 3 to 5 months, I think.
Do they have any comments back?
There are always comments, but then
Nothing that changed your protocol.
nothing has changed because it was part of the consent form saying we are going to be doing this. Now we are going to get to our second study. That's go on. So.
Because even it was, you mentioned you analyzed it. It wasn't, let's say, algorithm who would listen and analyze.
Yeah, so it was humans that one.
Yeah.
Well, initially, and we'll get to that too. So what's the data? So we have a lot of data. So it was that one data point that you get, or maybe up to 4 with the usual telemonitoring. We had 3,000 heart rate samples per day, 800 hours of audio in total. 600,000 accelerometer data points per day. And so we can sort of do some analyses and find out what the average heart rate is. You can say, okay, how much time was spent in sedentary activity, how much time was spent in moderate, vigorous physical activity using different algorithms. But lots of data. So our results, what do we find? So we felt that some people with COPD will wear and maintain a smartwatch because we had quite a bit of a lot of people we assessed, but very few actually enrolled, and even less were finished the 3-month study. So some people will wear and maintain a smartwatch, but we can reliably collect and transmit sensor data. So we did have technical issues. So our app was written by a PhD student in computer science, super smart guy, but not the team that's necessary to make a robust commercial level app that's going to do this without any bugs. Android release new updates, and our things would crash, so we had issues. But we still had a lot of data, even despite that. What we did find, patients were not really interested in just having a device that would just sit on their watch and let us get a bunch of data. They actually wanted to get their data and use it and access it. And that was a revelation to us. They wanted feedback. They wanted to know what their activity heart rate, and they wanted to know how to better manage their condition. So that led to our second study, which was engaging patients with this revelation. Like people ask them what they really want now. And so this is a study we did with Schiffer Ginsberg as our qualitative researcher expert, and using wearables and self-management apps in patients with COPD. So as our hypothesis, sort of back, we think that wearables and apps can improve care, but really you need people to use them. And it's not that useful if 1/6 or less of the population would use it to try to make an impact. And the literature says that people won't use it if it's difficult to use, if it's technically challenging. Also, patients with COPD, they didn't want their identity threatened. So they don't consider themselves as patients with COPD. They consider them as people, and they have to sometimes manage a condition. And so they didn't want that label as, I'm sick, I have to deal with these things because I'm a sick person with COPD. That wasn't their identity. And also, they don't like it when it disrupts relationships with healthcare providers. So I think to your point, if you just stick or graph this telemonitoring solution with other healthcare providers and don't look at their usual healthcare providers, that often that's not successful. And then patients also don't like it when there's a loss of control, and so they just don't like it when they enter all this data. They want to actually have the data and control to say, okay, well, it's not somebody else saying that I'm sick, I need to go to the emergency. They actually want to control their life. So we conducted a qualitative study to determine what patients would want. in an app and a wearable device. Recognizing a wearable wasn't enough, they actually had to get the data somehow, so looking at a mobile self-managed application. So we conducted semi-structured interviews with patients with COPD, did a thematic analysis, interviewed 14 patients with COPD, half female, and the average age was 69. So these are the themes that came out, and it's really two big buckets. One is the experiences of patients with COPD, which there's quite a bit of literature about already, but it's important to talk about that because the other large group of themes was how technology can influence these experiences. So the first experience was disease knowledge. A lot of patients say they didn't have enough information about COPD, and some trusted internet searches, some didn't. And so technology may be able to give them a place for relevant, curated information about COPD. The impact of COPD on their day-to-day management was high. So they often had trouble going for groceries or even taking a bath. And so the hope is that technology could give them some information about how they're doing, so how their heart rate's doing, how their oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, and then they could have feedback about that in terms of activity to know when they're pushing it or not so much, and be able to make those personalized connections with the data. They also wanted help managing exacerbations. So exacerbations, if you imagine, they have some baseline difficulty breathing, but the exacerbation is much worse and can become very scary. And they often, some do have action plans, some didn't, and some just things would come too quickly, and they would just have to go to the emergency department. And so their hope was that technology could help with early exacerbation detection. Most said that they had good access to their healthcare providers, their family doctors, their respirologists, even though sometimes it would take days to get help. There was a split in terms of what people wanted. Some thought it was a good idea to share this information to their healthcare providers. Some thought it would overwhelm their respirologist. That they did inform that they actually wanted control of this data. It wasn't just this data flowing to their healthcare providers, they actually wanted to control that. And finally, there are a lot of emotions around, especially exacerbations, feelings of fear with the difficulties of breathing. And the hope was that a solution could help make them feel reassured and connected. So just some quotes. So this is in terms of making connections. Well, it'd be useful for me to know when my oxygen level is dropping. Ahead of me, suddenly gasping for breath and thinking, I need to go and sit down. That would be really helpful to me. I think if I had something like that, I could be more in my own head, more observant of not letting myself get to that point for sure. So this is a quote from this is the category of feeling the fear. It's a horrible feeling because you don't know what to do to help yourself, and anything that you do doesn't work. It's a great deal of panic. You feel like you're breathing through a wet washcloth. Every time you take a breath in, you're gasping because you feel like you haven't gotten enough air in. And once you breathe out, you're not letting out enough either. So it escalates very quickly from being just an ordinary cold. In less than a day, it can turn into an exacerbation because it hasn't gotten caught soon enough. It's terrifying. And then the theme of feeling reassured and connected. I think psychologically, it could give you a bit of a boost, knowing that you had an electronic monitor of your health on a regular basis instead of leaving things up to chance. So there were some barriers to use of wearables and self-management apps that were identified for their study. So one was their variable technology use. So some of our participants were super adept. They worked for a technology company, had smartwatches, whereas some people didn't have a smartphone. They had have a cell phone, or some had smartphones and never used an app on their smartphone. We used watches that were quite large, Android smartwatches, LG Urbane. We had a lot of comments. We should get something a little sleeker, thinner, stylish, and not so heavy. There were accuracy and technical issues of the wearable. Some of that was because it is what some of our participants were from our study, and they talked about how our wearables, there were bugs with them, but they also talked about accuracy issues with Fitbit when they try to walk on a treadmill and it wouldn't count their steps properly. But they didn't want to become a prisoner of the numbers, and so that's just trying to live their life based on what their oxygen saturation or respiratory rate is. They actually wanted to be able to use this information, but not be trapped by it. And finally, a lot of people were on fixed income, so may not be able to afford a high-price solution. So we found the patient feedback extremely useful, and so we wanted, as a research group, to improve our engagement with people with COPD. And so we actually have created a COPD advisory board of 6 to 8 patients. Met already once, but we're meeting quarterly to get their feedback on the research idea. On our research idea, sorry. Okay, sensor validation. So we collected a lot of data, and the question is, how useful was that data? Was the audio data at all useful? So that was our next study, is validating that information. And so we conducted a study where we validated heart rate, respiratory rate, and activity using standardized procedures, and with a gold standard in people who are healthy in those COPD. So our gold standard was the Zephyr bioharness. So we recruited 16 people, got them to wear this, as well as a smartwatch at the same time, got them to do a set of activities. 6-minute walk test, go stairs, lying down, sitting, and then just sent them out for 3 hours with this as we collected data from both the gold standard and the smartwatch. So heart rate, so it's a sort of work from a master's student in computer science, Pegah Abbott. So the heart rate sensor, it's from the smartwatch, it's photoplethysmography. It measures heart rate, but also gives you a reliability rating at the same time. And we found that whenever it said it was anything but high, really the reliability was very poor and not worth using. The number of readings you get depends on what the person is doing. So if the person is just lying down, you could get quite a bit of data. But if they're doing a 6-minute walk test, which is trying to walk as fast as you can within 6 minutes, really would get less than 1 data point per minute. And we found that smartwatch accuracy was actually better in COPD patients than in healthy participants.
Rob, so I think just expand on that point about the watch reliability is not high. So it would give you 2 values at the same time, the actual heart rate and the reliability of that heart rate based on some algorithm, the internal algorithm.
Yeah.
And if it said the reliability is not high of whatever reading it is, don't trust it.
Exactly.
And was that correlated to the actual heart rate in some way? Or it didn't matter whether you were tachycardic, bradycardic, whatever, the reliability didn't seem to correlate? Or do you know how the performance of those algorithms?
So I didn't bring the graphs, but so when the reliability was off, the mean error was huge between the gold standard and so really not worth looking at.
Okay.
Did it depend on the activity? Probably did, right? So if you did more, the chances of actually getting and I'm not sure if people use Fitbits or other things, but it will give you a recording, and I use this as well, and often the recordings were garbage. And they wouldn't tell you that on the phone, on the watch, but you can look at it and say, well, my heart rate is not 30, or my heart rate is not 200 or something at this point. And that might be due to contact, right? How well it makes contact. So we did find that, yeah, the smartwatch actually was better in patients with COPD. And so this is some graphs, bland Altman graphs. So on the left, people without COPD, the right, people with COPD, and the x-axis is just the average of the bioharness, the gold standard heart rate, and the watch heart rate, and the y-axis is the difference. And so you can see the spread is much less in people with COPD. Why? Maybe because they move a little less, and they're a little less active, and so, but probably more accurate than people with COPD. So respiratory rate. So the smartwatch doesn't measure respiratory rate, and it does measure accelerometer and gyroscope. And there are algorithms that you can use that actually can determine your respiratory rate. So as we're all sitting here, breathing in and out, we actually are moving our wrists ever so slightly, and that apparently is enough for accelerometers and gyroscopes to detect. And so people have developed algorithms to do that. And the BioWatch was published 4 years ago. Using an algorithm of filters, you can get a decent respiratory rate as long as people aren't moving. And that was in a healthy population. Our PhD student created this algorithm he calls wear breathing using machine learning, and can detect a respiratory rate with a mean error of 2.1 breaths per minute while giving a reading every 50 seconds. But it's tunable. So if you want a lower absolute mean error, then you can just reduce, or you dial that up, and then you'll get less frequent reading. But to me, that's pretty cool, how you can actually get a respiratory rate from just accelerometers. Okay, so cough detection. So this is from the audio that we collected. So not really part of our validation study, but it is part of that the original study. And we had a lot of data. We had to label it. So actually get people to listen, say this is a cough, not cough, cough. And then train machine learning algorithms to detect that. And relatively easier than some of the other stuff, because these are discrete sounds. We found there's about 1 cough per hour. Most coughs were from the patient. So because we're actually recording from the wrist, it's not a microphone close to the person's mouth or a microphone of a smartphone. So we're picking up other people's coughs or coughs from the TV. But our cough detection currently, in speaking with our PhD students, we're close to 93% accuracy, which is close to state-of-the-art. And the novel part is the wrist-based detection of coughs. But hopefully we do more, and maybe there's something useful in terms of the types of cough. And other people have looked at determining wet versus dry coughs. And so maybe we can do that also with Smartwatch recording. So our current stage, just summarizing, we found that smartwatches in COPD patients are feasible. We can collect valid sensor data. We know what patients say they want from our patient engagement study. But our questions are, can we actually detect acute exacerbations? And that's why we're doing a second longitudinal study. And then can we also develop an app and a wearable that patients with COPD will use, that most people with COPD will use? And so we're doing a design study with 2 master's students from computer science at U of T. So our longitudinal study, so this is an update of our first study. And so again, a prospective cohort study of 30 patients, collecting sensor data and providing to patients in a self-management app. And the questions we have for this: can we detect acute exacerbation with patients with moderate to severe COPD? And then also, can we improve their self-management quality of life? So this is the study we're doing with Samsung. So we're using Samsung smartwatches, smartphones, and an app that they designed to provide that feedback. So we're collecting data. It's near continuous sensor data, heart rate, steps, accelerometer, gyroscope. And this time it has to be, so REB didn't like raw audio. They said the speech has to be muffled. And we're validating at the beginning with gold standard devices. So at time of enrollment, you have to again do the similar procedures we did to make sure that what we're actually measuring is valid. We're asking self-management qualified questionnaires, and then interviews at completion. And so should start recruiting next month is the plan for that.
Are you guys defining acute exacerbation based on
So it's based on two things. One, we're using the validated symptom score. And so if they have a score of 6 points for 2 days in a row, that's considered an exacerbation. But also measuring whether they were hospitalized, had an emergency department, had to contact healthcare providers.
And of this study, in the 6 months, are any of these patients going to be involved in pulmonary rehabilitation, or is that going to be an exclusion criteria?
No exclusion criteria. So luckily, the chances of a lot of our patients going to pulmonary rehab is very low because the access is tough. But a great program wouldn't reduce exacerbation. What does?
You have to ask, Rob.
It's a great thing, yeah, it's a good question. So, because it can reduce hospitalizations, make people better, and we don't want to stop that. And I don't know, but yeah, we should find it.
I'm just thinking the link of the telemonitoring and then the link to telerehabilitation and sort of where there's a lot of overlap when you're looking at this, activity.
are you going to have enough outcomes in 6 months or 30 patients to actually be able to do any algorithm validation?
So again, it's a second pilot study. So, and I think we should be getting 1.2 exacerbations per patient for the 6 months. So is that month? Okay. Yeah. So as long as we recruit the right patients in terms of the severity, but is 30 enough? It's probably enough for this study.
Sorry, George.
Coming back to the previous slide,
Sure.
there's a question about, maybe there's 2 slides, one more.
Right.
So the one with the accuracy, 99% accuracy, what does that mean?
So, great question. So I guess when there is a cough, I think we can detect. So
Usually, you've got sensitivity and specificity.
Yeah.
Usually we talk about accuracy, and I can understand when there's a cough, you're picking up 99% of them, but when it's not a cough, how many times which is most of the time.
yeah.
Cough
So these are
not a
sparse
cough.
events.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to get the accuracy of 99% if you just say not a cough, not a cough, not a cough, because it's almost always not a cough. My answer is,
I mean, how many faults, how many things are called coughs when they're not, and how, so, most of the day the person's here not coughing, but,
Yeah.
person on the hall coughs and.
no, you're right. So if I had our PhD student here, he could talk about the precision and recall, which the machine learning people like to talk about, as opposed to sensitivity and specificity or positive predictive value. I don't have that data.
Okay.
He does, and anyways. It's not just a pure labeling of, or just assuming that it's not coughing. There is some intelligence there, but you're right. It's a poor measure of how good a detection algorithm is by just using that one term. And maybe F1 score, I think they talked about. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Couple of comments. So first of all, the patients in my practice already use a technology to help identify their exacerbations early. It's a little older technology, but way cheaper than what you're using. It's called the telephone.
Yeah.
They call my office and say my symptoms are worse, and I give them a treatment, and sometimes, but not always, I keep them out of hospital. So my point is not entirely facetious. Whatever you're doing has got to beat that, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to me that any of the stuff you're actually measuring will do that. You may learn that. You may add machine learning to this and learn something that none of us ever suspected. Maybe that's where you're going with it. But I don't a priori see anything that I will get out of this that will tell me. I do get telemedicine reports now from patients who are getting the home visits, and they send me these things every week or every month. Almost nothing on that telemedicine fact is useful to me. Heart rate, blood pressure doesn't matter to me. The only thing I remotely look at is oxygen saturation. But even that doesn't tell me anything because it's once a day. That's never what they were doing. None of my patients have completely normal oxygen saturation. And by the way, there's no oxygen sat measurement on your phone. Why not?
Oh, so great point.
Yeah.
Thank you. So technology. So I think it's great in terms of access. Your patients have access. I think that's one of our problems within Canada is access to healthcare. And unfortunately, a lot of the patients that we talk to their access was the emergency department.
Yeah.
When you talk about 24/7, that's where they go. So is this going to fix things? No. We're kind of going to talk about that year 4 of a multi-year project. The oxygen saturation, not yet on the Smartwatch. I bought one from China not long ago. It was garbage. The one Samsung doesn't have it on the Smartwatch. They have it on the smartphone, and that's part of our study. But again, it's going to give us sparse readings of whenever they want to stick their finger on the camera.
Yeah.
And so that's a bit different than what we're thinking is that this passive data collection. It is hypothesis. I completely agree, right? How useful are these signals of heart rate, respiratory rate? So there is evidence that maybe respiratory rate can predict. Not from us, from the literature. So, but you're right. Oxygen saturation would be huge, not just from a patient perspective. They say they want it, but also that's also a very strong signal. Time is on our side though, because it's just getting better and better. And anyway, I think it may be the future. But we can talk about that at the end.
Trying to do, I'm just saying.
Okay.
Yeah, back to your measures and or plan development plot.
Okay.
When you're thinking about some of these measures and programming into your algorithm, one of the things that you guys may consider, I'm not sure if that's already being implemented, is the absolute value in itself may not be as informative. But if you use measures, for instance, chronotropic response index or heart rate recovery, the delta, the change. So, I mean, a lot of our patients with COPD have baseline heart rates of 90. So it's the change during the pre-exacerbation phase that may be more sensitive that you may want to consider. Same thing with respiratory rate. And then the change in their step count.
Sure. No, that's a great point. And we're not there yet. Hopefully with this next study, again, we have the luxury of getting a bunch of data and then being able to do some of these analyses. But those are great points. Thank you.
Does your patient app have the ability to take the data and plot it for the patient longitudinally so that you're able to, about to the point of the patient about control? Even if there's not real control, they can see what's going on, and they can look at their life events through the day and say, what was I doing?
So the answer is I don't know.
Okay.
Because we're starting the trial next month, but Samsung's been developing the app, and I haven't seen it yet. I should see it soon, this week or next. And so they have incorporated, so Samsung's got a UI team, UX team, and so they're good at this. And they have done patient interviews here and interviewed healthcare providers, but I don't know. And so that's one of our other issues is what they're building really what the patients want? And I don't know. And I think to your point, maybe that's would be very important, if not for the patients, also for the healthcare providers. And what is that summary? So your point, the telemedicine, not so useful, but what do healthcare providers want? And I think that's the next question that we do have. So that's what our master students are working on, is to create that platform, that app, that mobile, the mobile app, the wearable, and find out what they want, prototypes, mock-ups, and not just provide that excellent experience. Ideally, it would be great if we could change behavior, improve behavior. All right. Go ahead.
So I have two comments. First is based on our experience evaluating telehome care. That one is given to heart failure and COPD patients. COPD patients are much harder to actually be engaged in self-management than heart failure. Telehome care, OTN program, actually works for heart failure patients to some extent, not so much for COPD. Like when we look certain, and even when we did huge qualitative study for that particular evaluation, 89 different stakeholders, we interviewed 32 patients from different limbs. We actually they say they want more information, but in many cases, actually, they never opened the pamphlets that they got about the COPD information. Like our qualitative researcher would actually say, oh, so did you get anything from, I got this back, but I never opened. Like some of the interviews, like transcripts we read, they would be being interviewed by qualitative researcher while smoking. So, and some of these things, they are very hard to be engaged. That's some of the experience that we had, to be really engaged in self-management. Even their adherence rate, when you look with respect to telehome care, heart failure versus COPD was different. So we are doing another one now, with this over 6,000 patients. So we'll have even richer data actually to evaluate for OTN program. My other comment for you with respect to applications, UHN developed beautiful application for heart failure medley by Dr. Heather Ross and Joe Capazzo's group. Something actually where they incorporated algorithms to detect exacerbation for heart failure. So OTN works differently. It's a one-time data upload. They see the data. OTN nurse calls if there is an alert trigger that she thinks she should be responded to. This one, actually, every patient gets a feedback either based on algorithm or based on the nurse or medley nurse, or based on a heart failure specialist, depending how severe alert was.
Yeah.
So, and it's quite actually nice because it does actually follow patients longitudinally, and I believe patients can see some of the data. So something maybe for you to think about talking to Kafar's group. Part of that unfortunate medley is that has not been employed as widely as OTN. So we do not know, like they do not know how much super effective it would be, though it does improve quality of life. But I'm just saying it does provide patients with a feedback.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a good work involved with the development of that app with respect to heart failure.
Yeah.
Okay,
And so, and we've talked as well. I think there are some challenges in terms of the currently still Apple, right?
So there's a COPD project and there's a heart failure project.
Yeah.
And at one point, COPD was part of heart failure as well. The heart failure project has continued just to be heart failure. We have them on both platforms. But what we found is that our COPD population wasn't benefiting as much because they didn't want as high touch, or the need wasn't as high touch as with heart failure patients. And so we split off COPD and just started focusing on the Apple side of it. And it's currently only on iOS.
Yeah, so we've been in discussion as well, and hopefully we'll be a grant application in the future to hopefully marry the two. But it's still quite a bit of money to port to Android, which is our current environment. But I think there is definitely ways we can work together. All right, so just some lessons learned about the journey. So it's been a fun challenge to work with other disciplines, including computer science. So super bright students within computer science that have been working on this and driving this. We learned to involve patients early. We provided an enlightening experience. So the engagement, I think what you're saying, was very important. This is a long process. We're about year 4 in a 8+ year process. Hisham El-Shayer, who invented RezoDX, is one of the...
we work also with them. Evaluated RezoDX.
Exactly, and so he's also part of our team and advises us in terms of that it's not a quick process. And then there's a lot of stuff outside the typical clinician strike zone, technology development, working with our technology development partners, contracts with industry, intellectual property and patent. Our PhD students in computer science, I'm not sure if you guys know what they want to do nowadays. So when I was doing my computer engineering, everybody wanted to work for IBM. Now, startups, it's all startups. It's not Google, it's not Amazon, it's all startups. So yeah, that's where they care about. So in conclusion, some patients with COPD will wear smartwatches that collect sensor data, and we can collect near continuous data to reach a broader population. Need to address design issues, engage patients. The patients with COPD are probably a lot tougher than heart failure. The sensor data, and the signals, heart rate, respiratory rate, can be accurate, but some more work is necessary to see if we can detect acute exacerbations and if early detection actually improves outcomes. Large team, Tanya's our research coordinator, Andrew that's my wife as well. Eyal Valera, Frank Rudzik, Fanny Kai from computer science, and then our students. So very computer science heavy, so it'd be great to, one of my purposes also to recruit more clinicians into this. We've had a lot of support from the Ministry of Knowledge, Ministry of Health, Innovation Fund, Age Well Catalyst Grant, THGHRI Catalyst Grant, Samsung, and I'm also a MAC chair recipient. Want me to do the whole thing? No. All right, questions? Go ahead.
So I remember when Heather going to talk about telemonitoring, she made the point that by the time research is funded, completed, published, it's already obsolete. This thing moves so quickly in the technology realm. Is that something you need to worry about? In general, if you're developing, that first watch you showed us looked like a diving watch, and they're a lot smaller now. And the new, I know you're not using Apple Watches, but the Apple Watches are very slim, pretty much bigger than a regular wristwatch. And is there a limit how good the technology can be in terms of what you can detect with the flashing lights in the back of someone's wrist?
So there's huge interest, I think, ever since Apple did publish around the ECG monitoring and FDA approval. I think there's huge interest in the industry, especially from Samsung and other competitors to so I think things are only going to get better and more interest within the health field. And so things are moving rapidly. Should we still bother to do studies? I think the answer is yes.
Well, I guess I just wonder how much you want to invest in something when you know it's going to be everything's going to be different 2 years from now. And is it just the principles, or is it the actual? I invest in the hardware, or is it just the?
Well, so I think you still need the data, and Samsung is big on getting data. They're not really the patient experience for this piece wasn't big. It's more the data that seems to be the important part, right? Being able to create these algorithms are the important part, and to do that, you need data. And you're right, things are going to change, but it should only get better, right, as the sensors get more accurate. Thank you very much.